Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on documenting and supporting SSI and SSDI applications involving substance use disorders. My name is Pam Hine, Senior Project Associate at the SAMHSA SOAR TA Center, and I will be your moderator today. Before we begin, just a few items to review. This training is supported by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The contents of this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of SAMHSA or DHHS. The training should not be considered substitutes for individualized care and treatment decisions. Some webinar instructions. So the slides and materials will be available on the SOAR website, but also just as a reminder, you can find these in the emails you've received about this webinar, and you'll also receive an email after the webinar with a link to the material. So if you just want to be fully present and listen to the panelists, you'll be sure to have the slides after the webinar. The recording will be available within a week on the SOAR website and later on YouTube as well. We'll be taking your questions, so we welcome them. So please submit them using the Q&A feature. We answer questions at the end of the presentations, and we take as many as we have time for. All the participant lines will be muted and the chat feature is disabled. An evaluation is at the very end, so your browser will redirect you to a survey following the webinar. So we kindly ask you to do the evaluation. There is ASL interpretation and live captioning available to enhance accessibility. So we have Kelly Lon and Linda Ege, and closed captioning, we have Rob Hemingway. So thank you so much for providing these services for our participants. So it's my pleasure to introduce Doreen Gross, who's the PATH Program Coordinator and SOAR Core with the Division of State and Community Systems Development at the Center for Mental Health Services at SAMHSA, who will give our welcome today. Doreen?
Yes, thank you, Pam, and a warm welcome to all of you joining us today. On behalf of SAMHSA, I would like to welcome you to this SOAR webinar titled Documenting and Supporting SSI and SSDI Involving Substance Use Disorders. As you know, providing the disability determination services with a complete picture of a person with a mental illness who is experiencing homelessness can be difficult. Frequently, co-occurring substance use complicates the process of documenting disability. Given the high prevalence of co-occurring disorders, it is critical to understand the implications for SOAR-assisted applications. This is particularly important when it comes to writing the medical summary report. This webinar will help you understand how to document substance use and provide information in the medical summary report that helps the disability determination services decide whether or not the substance use is material to the disability. So with that said, I would like to welcome and thank our presenters for your willingness to share your expertise and experience on this important topic. I will turn it back over to Pam, who will be moderating today's webinar. Pam, send it your way.
Thanks again, Doreen, for your and your staff's support of our webinars. We truly appreciate that. So the purposes and objectives. So we hope that by the end of this hour or an hour and a half, you will have a better understanding of Social Security's what they call drug addiction and alcoholism, or DA&A, and what that's all about, and how you can understand how to document DA&A with your applicants that you work with. So our presenters will share strategies on how to write these effective substance use history sections in the MSR, especially where there is evidence of DA&A. And we're also going to share some tools that really help you in translating that information into an effective MSR. So we're really excited, to be able to share the expertise of all the panelists with you. So starting things off will be Amanda Starkey, who's a project associate 2 here at the SAMHSA SOAR TA Center, who has a background in addiction and really understands this area. Natasha Gutierrez, who's with the New Mexico Division of Disability Determinations, will talk a little bit about SSA's DA&A policy and the concept of materiality. So we're so excited to have Natasha's expertise here. And then we have Bug Carlson, who is SOAR Executive Director and local lead with Heading Home in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who has a lot of success with writing MSRs, particularly this portion. And then ending our webinar will be both Ashley Aragon, who is also Program Director with Heading Home, and a caseworker who has experience using the SOAR model. And we're so grateful to have Elisa with us, who is a SOAR beneficiary who worked closely along with Ashley on their disability application. So we're going to have a conversation with both Elisa and Ashley as well. So we look forward to that. And then, of course, there'll be time for Q&A as well. So to kick things off, we have Natasha from DDS, who will talk a little bit more about SSA policy in this area. Natasha?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we view or how we work through claims that involve DA&A, as we call it. So I'm going with my first slide. SSA does not consider a claimant disabled if drug addiction or alcoholism is a contributing material factor to the determination that the claimant is disabled. So how we define that is a substance use disorder is defined in the DSM as being maladaptive or problematic pattern of substance use that leads to clinically significant impairment or distress. So we go off of that when we're determining if it's a substance use disorder. A question that we get a lot is, what about medical marijuana? So addiction or use of prescription medications is not considered a substance use disorder by Social Security. So especially in New Mexico, this is legal. That could play into it a little bit too, but typically that is Social Security's stance on that. So we do not consider that a substance use disorder when making our determinations. Conditions caused by substance use are not considered a substance use disorder either by the Social Security Administration. Here is an example. I have some examples of conditions that we would not consider to be a substance use disorder. Things that we commonly see are fetal alcohol syndrome, fetal cocaine exposure, addiction or use of prescription medications, and that includes methadone or Suboxone, which we do see routinely, nicotine use disorders, caffeine-induced disorders, and then I think it's important to point out, because this is also commonly things that we commonly see, is conditions caused by substance use. So alcoholic cirrhosis, if someone acquired HIV through drug use, or any kind of injury suffered in an accident while under the influence of drugs or alcohol. So I'm going back to materiality and whether we say it's material or not. What we mean by that is DA&A is material when the claimant would not be disabled if they were not using the drugs or alcohol. So an example of that would be if someone only has hallucinations when using a substance, but when they don't use the substance, they have no issues. So that would be just one example of that. When DA&A is material, the claim is denied. And examples of when it's not material, DA&A is not material when the claimant would still be disabled if using the substance. So if we remove that from the equation, the impairments are still there. We consider that not material. When DA&A is not material, the claim will be allowed in these instances. Okay. DA&A materiality determination. So how we go through that is we need objective evidence from an acceptable medical source established by a that establishes a medically determinable impairment of a substance use disorder, and the claimant is found disabled considering all impairments, including the DA&A. So at DDS, we're always looking at the whole person. So that's while often, probably maybe someone alleged one thing, and maybe just psychological issues, and then you find we're sending them to exams for physical, because it's in their best interest that we're always looking at the person as a whole. We want the big picture, the whole picture. No, we do not make a DA&A materiality determination if the claimant's only severe impairment is a substance use disorder, the claimant has a substance use disorder and other impairments, but perhaps the other impairments are not severe, the claimant has a substance use disorder, and the other impairments, they may be severe but not disabling by Social Security rules. So I wanted to give some examples of when DA&A is not material, more examples of when not material. The claimant has a disabling impairment independent of the DA&A. The claimant has acquired a second separate or multiple disabling impairments while using substances. The claimant's DA&A is medically caused the other disabling impairments, but the resulting impairments are irreversible or could not improve to the point of non-disability. And in the next slide, I included a chart. This chart is a chart that we share with adjudicators when we are training them on how to handle claim, not just our adjudicators, but our doctors also on handling claims where DA&A is involved. So this one I just sort of included so you guys could have access to this too, sort of how we kind of view things as we're going through the sequential evaluation process of a claim, and kind of how we give the adjudicators different scenarios. And we typically, especially, when we're training people, our goal is always, what is it going to take to allow this claim? What do I need to allow this claim? That is how we go into things. That is how we view them. That's how we train people. So this is just a chart for your reference on kind of how we would go through these when we're adjudicating claims. So the next slide, I get a lot of questions about this, periods of abstinence. So ideally, it's helpful for us if we can kind of evaluate periods of abstinence. That's ideal for us. So evidence from a period of abstinence is the ideal evidence determining where a physical or mental impairment would improve to the point of non-disability. So this can be medical evidence that's contained within their records, or this could be functional evidence. Social Security, as you know, relies quite heavily on functional evidence, so we weigh those both very heavily. The difficult thing for adjudicators and for you is SSA does not really provide us guidance on the length or the number of periods of abstinence for us to demonstrate whether DA&A is material on every case. So we're using our adjudicative judgment, working with our doctors to kind of work through those issues. So a common question that I get about these periods of abstinence is, what happens if you don't have evidence of that? It's not in their medical records. You're not able to obtain that functional evidence. And that can be very frustrating. I know for you, for your clients, it's frustrating for us. So something that you can do, on the next slide I have you can consider providing opinion from an acceptable source regarding whether the claimant's impairments would be severely limiting, even if the claimant stopped abusing drugs and alcohol. So I know you probably submitted before the medical source opinions, where you're kind of rating things, how long they can stand, how long they can sit, mental impairments. It's similar to that. It's just that you're providing us a statement from somebody who treats them, who knows your client, and can give us an opinion on that. We weigh those very heavily, especially on somebody who knows the person. Treating source statements are always, that's kind of the gold standard for us. So if you don't have that evidence of periods of abstinence, this is something that you can do, and this would actually be super helpful for us too. We won't write them off over that. So definitely, and I would encourage reaching out to an adjudicator in those situations and let them know that you're working on that and kind of work through that, because that's definitely something that we can work around and would be really helpful. On the next slide, I just included our actual policy. When you have access to these resources, you can take a look, but these are the actual policies that we use when we're evaluating cases, the Social Security policy. And I think I provided the handouts for that too. That's where we get all this information, and I basically just broke it down into that. That's all I have for my presentation.
Thanks, Natasha. I think one of the takeaways is learning that DDS has a decision tree for working through materiality, figuring that out. And that is also available in the SOAR online course in the section in the class where we talk about substance use disorders and how to document substance use. So thanks for sharing that. I think that can be really helpful for SOAR practitioners to understand, that there is kind of like a sequential evaluation to think through the materiality decision. So thank you. We'll come back to you during Q&A, I'm sure. I see some questions that came in before you started your presentation, which hopefully were answered, but we'll make sure we have a response. So next we have, and I think we're getting back to the Amanda's presentation. So now Amanda's going to start with talking about how she documents in the medical summary report.
Thank you, Pam. Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Starkey, and I'm a project associate with the SAMHSA SOAR Technical Assistance Center. I have a background in addiction studies, and I have been SOAR trained and providing SOAR services in a lot of different capacities since 2010. So that is my background with SOAR. Today, I'm going to talk about taking the information that you learned from Natasha's presentation and putting it into your work in supporting SOAR-assisted applications, particularly with writing the substance use history section of the medical summary report. So the key concepts I'm going to discuss today is we're going to do a review of the definition of materiality from the standpoint of a SOAR representative. We'll summarize the substance use history in the MSR and why that's important and how you can do that. And then we're going to talk about the other side of things with documenting the materiality portion of a person's substance use history in your MSR. And we'll end it by looking at some writing samples and key pieces of information that can be provided for when you are documenting substance use history and also documenting materiality in the medical summary report. So a quick review of the definition of disability, or the definition of materiality. So when a substance use disorder is documented in the medical evidence, the disability examiner then needs to assess the applicant's disabling conditions and the substance use. So like Natasha said, what they're looking for is evidence that even though they may have a diagnosis of a substance use disorder, that they are still experiencing marked to severe functional impairments caused by the symptoms of their other conditions, not just their substance use. So if DDS can determine that the applicant's remaining conditions, once their substance use, the symptoms and the functional impairments from their substance use are set aside, if they can determine that their remaining conditions are disabling, they'll be able to find that the applicant's substance use is not a contributing factor that's material to the determination of disability. So our goal as SOAR representatives is to figure out how we can make this message concise and clear and give the DDS examiner all of the information they need in order to make the determination that although the applicant has a current or past substance use disorder diagnosis, that isn't what's causing them to not be able to maintain employment at an SGA level. It's the symptoms and the functional impairments caused by their other mental and physical health conditions. So the actual language from Social Security about materiality is in the SSA Code of Federal Regulations. If you aren't familiar with this, I highly recommend checking out the Code of Federal Regulations. Once I discovered the Code of Federal Regulations, it made a lot of my work easier because SSA clearly lays out almost every rule that they have. So use it as a guide for your work. So the substance use history section of the MSR basically is going after two goals and should be broken down into two primary topics. The first is to document the applicant's substance use history. So what we want to do here is provide background information about the initial use of the applicant. What led them to use substances, drugs, or alcohol for the first time? Did a traumatic event happen? Were they experiencing a lot of symptoms that may not have had a diagnosis at that point? And they started using socially with friends because it made them feel better and it helped them cope with some of the symptoms that they were experiencing. So it's good to provide that background information about the initial use. Next, the writer should move on to talk about how that substance use progressed over time. So what happened with the applicant's relationship with substance use after their initial introduction to it? So did they find that it was making them feel better, or it was numbing the pain they were experiencing, or it was helping to calm some of their hallucinations or feelings of anxiety? So they continued to use and the use progressed over time. So we want to tell the story. And I think a really great thing to keep in mind while you're writing every section of the medical summary report, but particularly the substance use history section, is that it is our job to tell the applicant's story because they're never going to get to do that. They won't be able to call the disability examiner and tell them their life history and all of the contextual details to understand how their relationship with substance use history has progressed on their own. So we can do that by synthesizing the information in the records and through our interviews with the applicant to document a really clear understanding of the relationship between the applicant and their substance use. So for this first section, the last topic you want to focus on is discussing the applicant's current use status in the context of that substance use. So are they currently using substances, or if not, how long have they been in a period of non-use? Talk about the role the substance use has in the applicant's life. So they may be using drugs intermittently when they can get access to them, and when they're not using drugs, they're experiencing the symptoms very severely And then it helps to numb the symptoms a little bit when they are using substances to self-medicate in some cases. So I think the goal here for you as SOAR providers, or for anyone who's trying to help people who may have a substance use disorder applying for disability benefits, is to understand that we can tell the story and provide the contextual clues needed for the disability examiner to understand the role the substance use plays in the applicant's life and what their current usage looks like, and how they're feeling when they use substances versus how they feel when they're not using substances. Like Natasha said, and I wrote this down so I could make sure to address it on my portion, DDS is looking for the big picture and the whole picture. So this is kind of our opportunity to provide beyond what's documented in the medical records to show the whole picture of the applicant's life and experiences. All right, so in the first section, we talked about the context of substance use and the role it plays in the applicant's life. The next part of the substance abuse section of the medical summary report should focus on documenting that the substance use is not material to the applicant's disability. So a common thing that we see at the TA Center is that case managers might use the substance use history section of the MSR to just outline the history of the applicant's substance use. And that's not actually the goal. The goal of this section is to illustrate without a doubt that the applicant's substance use is not material to their disability. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind when you're writing this section. It's not necessarily just to show their substance use history. We're trying to clearly illustrate that their substance use is not material to their disability. So once you've clearly laid out their substance use and what it's looked like and how it's progressed over their life, the disability examiner will have the contextual details needed to understand the materiality portion of their past or current substance use. So to do this, this is where the medical records come in, and the substance use treatment records, if you have them. So if you can, document any periods of non-use by citing negative toxicology screens. And it doesn't have to necessarily be that they were in an inpatient rehabilitation program, because we know not a lot of people have access to that. It could be that they were taken to the emergency room when they were having an anxiety attack, or when they were experiencing delusions and hallucinations, and they ran a toxicology screen and the person showed that they did not have any drugs or alcohol in their system. This would be a great example of a time when you can document that even though they do have a substance use disorder, I have really great evidence that they were experiencing severe symptoms and they didn't have any drugs or alcohol in their system. And expand on that with discussing the severity of the symptoms during periods of documented non-use. So what you can talk about is, on this day that the person that went to the emergency room was experiencing extreme symptoms. Maybe they were discharged from the emergency room, but they continued to experience those symptoms until they started using drugs again, and it helped to numb the symptoms they were experiencing. Use quotes and citations from the treatment records that describe the symptoms the applicant experienced during periods of non-use. So these could be quotes from the applicant or quotes from treatment or case management records. So if we can help illustrate that these symptoms are clearly persisting when the applicant is not using, it's great evidence to include in the medical summary report. In some instances, you won't be able to document a period of non-use, but you could use the applicant's own quotes and their recollection of events and describe that in this section of the medical summary report. And like Natasha said, if you don't have a documented history or period of non-use, you could reach out to one of their treatment providers and ask them to write a letter explaining what types of symptoms they could expect the applicant to continue experiencing if they stopped taking drugs or drinking alcohol. All right, so now I wanted to present a couple of writing samples. So the first writing sample, and you can read it. I'm not going to read this entire paragraph to you. Don't worry about that. But I just wanted to point out some key phrases that you may want to use, and I give you full permission to take these language patterns or take the idea of what I've written and use it to help with writing your own substance use history sections of the MSR. These slides will be available to you after the webinar so that you can take this information and keep it on hand. If you're struggling to write the substance use history section, it can guide you in your writing. So for this gentleman, his name is Julian, and he is a younger adult who has a history of substance use going back to his teen years. So I began this section by writing about what was the initial use. So he started drinking when he was 13 years old, around the time the abuse from his father became more violent. So that shows the relationship between drinking and the mental health symptoms or the trauma he was experiencing at that time. So I go on to provide a direct quote from him about what was going on, because he did have a period in his teen years when he was not using any substances. With a direct quote, "Even though I wasn't using, I was so depressed that I could barely get out of bed." So that showed that that was a year of documented sobriety, and he was still experiencing severe symptoms from depression. He went back to drinking again and using, I think he was using heroin. It was the only way I got relief from the thoughts in my head. So again, I'm showing the relationship between his substance use and the symptoms he's been experiencing over time, and how that relationship progressed from when he first started drinking when he was 13. And then I can end this section with using drugs is the only way I can escape my symptoms for a little while. So this provided an overview of the context of the role that substance use plays in Julian's life. So the next writing sample addresses the materiality portion. So I laid out his personal history with substance use, and now it's my job to make sure I'm providing medical evidence that shows that his substance use is not material to his disability. So first, I provided an overview of when he was in treatment and had weekly urine screens to check for substance use. So from December 8th to March 26th, his urine screenings were negative for drugs and alcohol. And in those treatment notes from the time he had those negative urine screens, his case manager noted that he was quiet and suspicious, muttering, and had little interaction with staff and refused group. So I took direct quotes from his treatment records to document how his symptoms persisted during episodes of documented sobriety. So, and then on the next time he was seen, there was a clean screen from the previous week. He seemed very agitated and tearful. And then finally, at the end of that 3-month period of sobriety, he had a negative urine screen. Julian sat away from the group during therapy and quietly cried. So again, I was addressing the materiality portion by providing evidence that when Julian was not using drugs or alcohol, he was still experiencing symptoms, and you can find that documented in his treatment records. So we actually just rolled out some supplemental videos from the TA Center. So if you want to hear more about it, and you can actually read the Code of Federal Regulations guidelines on how DDS determines materiality. We should have that available very shortly on the SOAR online course.
Thanks, Amanda. Wonderful presentation. And we have some great questions coming in. I think some may be answered by the presentations, but I think looking at the Social Security rules and the federal regulations, you may be able to get more insight, into Social Security's policy in this area too. So now we're going to hand things over to Bug, who's going to really dig deeper in, some examples of the MSR section for substance use disorders, what's effective, what's ineffective, and what really wowed DDS. So we want Bug to really, dig deep in sharing some of these examples. Bug, take it away.
Hey, y'all. My name's Bug. I am in New Mexico on the traditional land of the Tewa people. I am excited to be with you today. I have been writing MSRs since 2020. I have been editing other people's MSRs since 2021. I have written a lot of MSRs. I have read far more MSRs. I have read some really phenomenal substance use sections, and I have come across some that didn't do what they needed to do. And with writing MSRs, we have a goal in mind, which is to be a part of the evidence that creates the story for DDS to come to a favorable decision. So I have my own definition of an MSR, which is to assist in the process of getting to a disability allowance by advocating for the person's personal experiences, presenting supportive medical evidence from the record, and obtaining collateral sources in service of demonstrating the marked functional limitations experienced by the person with a disability that keeps them from performing at substantial gainful activity levels, and to provide an index to the wider lens of the application. And so when I dive into an MSR, I'm always looking from this angle. I'm always thinking what's going to win the case and how to win a case. And I'll let you know now that I've read a lot of MSRs and I've edited a lot of MSRs, but I've never been on the other end. I've never been on the Natasha Gutierrez end of making these decisions. So I think I'm pretty sure I can generally know what a good MSR is, but I don't, from their perspective, I sometimes wonder. The important thing to know about an MSR is we put a lot of work into them. Many hours, many frustrations, many hours of interviewing, many hours of going through medical records, many hours of writing. And sometimes it can feel like, why are we putting so much work into this? And so I think this definition that I've created of an MSR really helps us understand that. But I will also say, I have won cases in which the symptoms seemed quite material to the substance use, and I have won those cases. And I have also lost cases in which I have been able to prove months of non-use with substantial functional limitations. And I have lost those cases. I've been told by an adjudicator that my argument was not compelling with 4 months of non-use. So, all of this can sometimes, not go the way we want, but we just keep going. Of course, I'm taking that to an appeal level and to a hearing level. So what is the goal of the substance use section within this greater goal of providing a historical and present narrative to DDS? And I need to move myself out of the way to be able to see. So the goal is to demonstrate that substance use, as we've heard 1,000 times throughout this this talk, it's to prove that substance use is not material to the disability. And as Natasha always says, if you take the substance away, does the disability remain? So I think I read things in the chat like, if someone gets a DUI and gets hurt, would they be denied? And the answer is no, they would not be denied on the basis of substance use, because it would not be material to the disability that remains. So how do you document, how do we make sure that we help DDS understand that it's not material to the illness? One, we document co-occurring illnesses. So, very often, I rarely see a methamphetamine use disorder or an opiate use disorder that doesn't have a co-occurring depression or schizophrenia or co-occurring anxiety going with it. my mentor always said, there's no one drinks that much for fun. And I've always taken that to heart of trying then to figure out why someone is using substances to such a degree, and that figuring out why, that detective orientation is really, really helpful. Also describing the contents of their use. So Amanda talked about this. She talked about going into the background of these, and then the history of how it progressed and the current use. I really see a lot of MSRs that come to me, and they're really just talking about the drugs or the alcohol. They talk about the beginning of the use, they talk about the progression, and they talk about what they're using now, but they don't include the context of why the use. So remember those 5 W's that they always talk about in English class. You do need to use all of them to figure out how to give context of the use. And so I'm going to give you multiple examples of that in a second. Quote from the record whenever available. So especially if they're, we've already talked about this, especially if there are periods of sobriety that you have quotes for, but also I found quotes of my folks that are currently using. I found quotes of psychiatrists, if they write this is a primary disorder is schizophrenia, secondary disorder is methamphetamine use, then that is definitely good evidence. Double check those UAs, like Amanda was saying. I have definitely come across multiple. We know that ERs can be very biased against our clients. And I've definitely come across multiple records in which the doctor was alleging that the client's or the applicant's use of substances was the reason for their visit. And then the UA says that they are non-using. But the doctor never really goes back on their record and acknowledges that. So I actually go and check the UAs for all of my medical records because I need to make sure that's one of the services I can provide to my client. I also do, I also provide additional research and information, which I'll show you in examples here. We're going to start with an ineffective MSR. I'm going to tell you this, or ineffective substance use section. This is the entire section that I was presented with. It was no more than this. Nothing is bolded because there's nothing of particular substance here. So we have started to experiment with various things. And so we have a history and we have a why, which he enjoys the dissociative symptoms. And we have a how or a how not. When he has money, he uses, but it doesn't tell us anything. So this was the entirety of an MSR substance use section I received once, which I would call ineffectual and unacceptable. Another ineffective description, this one's a little bit longer. It gives us a background that they started in high school, that he got in trouble, that he had friends who hung out together, and it says that what he uses now, it says what he has a history of using in the medical records, but it doesn't say why he uses. It doesn't say, it gives us a period of time without use, but it doesn't tell us if there were symptoms going on. So there's just a lot missing from these examples that we could really, I think that you can really just get often from listening to your client. If you ask them about their use, you can really get some more thorough answers. So I think that the MSR questions can be really helpful as a starting point, but you definitely need to dig deeper. Don't hurt your client by any means or re-traumatize them, but definitely try to get a handle on what's the point, what's the purpose of this use. So let's see, I've had clients that I have one for, and they had substantial alcohol use disorders, and they would go to the hospital with suicidal ideations while intoxicated. And so I needed to prove that they had depression while they were sober as well, or while they were not using. And so those, or I would describe why that use exasperated that behavior, that behavior was something that the client was already feeling when they were not using, but that got exacerbated, or they exacerbated on purpose by using alcohol. So there's so many ways to approach it, and it's really about creativity. This is a pretty neutral description. It's pretty short. It says what the daily intake is. And it mentions a couple times that they use for body aches and headaches, body pains and headaches. But it doesn't have anything from the record. It doesn't go into more what does that mean. And so it starts to get there, but it just doesn't go all the way. And effective, this is this was one of the first MSRs that one of my staff wrote. And I was so impressed by their ability to assist this woman, we'll call her Rachel, with her severe methamphetamine use disorder. So it goes through various things. It mentions that, I just think this is an interesting thing. She used methamphetamine to quit using alcohol, which I just think is very interesting. But she finds her behaviors are less severe when she's using alcohol than methamphetamine, or when she's, yeah. But she also says it helps with her emotional and physical pain. So we have it there. She says specifically what she says is, she says, because of all my stress. And then, you can always write what the client says and then give a description after that of what that really means. So because she says, because of all my stress, and you write, Rachel states her continued use of substances is because it helps with her physical and emotional pain. Another big factor for Rachel is that her partner was a prominent pressuring factor in her use. And she quotes, "He just causes me so much stress and I am in so much pain because of the stress he causes. And we already know that stress causes her to use." But with this, we can also use a little outside research and understand that this is something called substance use coercion, which occurs when perpetrators of intimate partner violence undermine and control their partners through substance use tactics and actively keep them from meeting treatment and recovery goals, which was very true for this client. That was a very true thing that was happening for them. She, anytime that she was away from him, she actually didn't use anymore. And so when they were together, he would organize her use and keep her using, which I think we see pretty often with our more vulnerable clients. We also have a psychiatrist on record writing that she has an unspecified recurrent depressive disorder, severe, that is co-occurring to her substance use. And so the psychiatrist doesn't write that it's not material to, but I write it's not material to. So I really am pointing it out to that adjudicator. I want them to see that, this psychiatrist, this is really seeing what's happening for this client. And I'll tell you, this psychiatrist and many psychiatrists have trouble with co-occurring use disorders. It can be really difficult to discern what's going on, what is methamphetamine and what is schizophrenia. So I definitely also encourage conversations with mental health providers because they have a lot to say and they're thinking a lot of things about these various concerns. There's also a non-use period, which is great. However, we don't actually have any medical records with her not using, but the client, the writer actually witnesses this client not using. She says, this writer witnessed the decline in her methamphetamine use. It was apparent she was in extreme pain as evidence from slow walking and grimacing faces. She also writes some other notes about, so you are, as a writer, allowed to witness that client and make judgments as well. So that writer has a particular knowledge of methamphetamine use. So she was able to use that. It was a way to understand that to really be able to say, this client is not, applicant is not using, and here's why. She says that for those 6 weeks, her depression has worsened and her anxious mood continues. So not only are we seeing a period of sobriety, which is great to have, but what is continuing to occur during that period of sobriety is even more important. And of course, there's long-term effects of substances that if you use methamphetamine for 20 years, guess what? Your brain does not look the same anymore. Your brain does not act the same anymore. And so the writer also adds, she still experiences mental impairments that appear to be long-term neurological damage from decades of alcohol use disorder and methamphetamine disorder. We have another effective, and we just won this case, so that's pretty exciting. So we know that this MSR was effective. The next one, I never got to bring this case to fruition. The applicant passed away before we were able to do so. But the general way that this was a really hard case. The client was had a very severe methamphetamine use disorder, had very severe symptoms that could be etiology, could be either schizophrenia or methamphetamine use disorder. We have 35 years of use with it as well. We have, she's not allowed in the hospitals. She's not allowed in anywhere really because of her aggression. And so this was a very complicated case, but she did have periods of sobriety or periods of non-use while she was incarcerated, which we all know those records are never as good as we hope they can be. But you can at least prove that someone was in PAC or PAC or the psychiatric unit while they were incarcerated. My clients also think it's funny when I ask them, like, oh, were you sober when you were incarcerated? And they like laugh and they're like, no. So I always think it's this kind of naivety of us. This client was an extremely difficult client to work for. But we do, so I start by writing that her substance use is secondary to her psychiatric struggles, although some of her symptoms are worsened by methamphetamine use, including persistent delusions of parasitosis. So you don't want to hide away that which is a part of the substance use disorder, because, you know, your DDS person your adjudicator is going to see that in the record as well. So I'd never suggest trying to hide away from something. Like, this client very seriously does have a methamphetamine-based delusion, but she has other very serious complexities to it. So all of these, her extreme rage, her memory issues, her inability to care for herself are all connected to her post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and history of trauma. So she has been experiencing homeless since she was 15 years old. She's experienced regular sexual and physical assaults. So these substances help her escape her symptoms. I'm going to tell you right now, Paige never told me that these helped her escape her symptoms, because she was not capable of telling me that. These are things that I was, you know, that we as the caseworker or the SOAR worker must bring about for them. So I had a quote from the MSW that was working with her that said, even when she appears to be functioning fairly well, she goes from zero to 100. I've never had an experience with her outside of going from 0 to 100. So we have that phrase, even when she seems to be functioning fairly well. So Paige's extreme aggression is a symptom of her bipolar disorder and PTSD that is not only magnified by her substance use, but lasts beyond her use. As she would get in, you know, she would be in the hospital, she would be injected with, I don't know what they're called, but the medications that help bring someone to be calm, you know, they wouldn't even work on her. And she would continue with severe behavioral issues even when she was incarcerated. So then I write about I look into her long-term use and what that means for brain plasticity. So I wrote an entire paragraph about prefrontal cortex of the brain and the ways that it's affected by long-term methamphetamine use. And so Paige's use has altered, Paige's brain has been altered due to her meth use in a manner that has aggravated her mental illness and suspected developmental disabilities. So like with Rose, who we just talked about, again, really pointing out also, and I've actually asked Natasha, like, do you guys, look at the long-term effects of these intoxicating factors on our clients? And she said yes. So that was good to know. And we all know severe trauma has really intense effects on how the brain looks and acts too, which then bring about substance use disorders and that kind of stuff. The one thing I thought was really interesting, and I love to share this because I just think it's just an amazing way to use evidence, is, does your client have a competency to stand trial? Were they found incompetent to stand trial? Well, that means that she was sober when she was found to be incompetent, which means that sober, she is not able to do many things, like being able to proceed with the proceedings or to understand the nature of the proceedings or to even cooperate with her attorneys. And so this is really amazing evidence. The competency to stand trial is really amazing evidence, if you have nothing else, that your client was sober and found to be unable to do certain things. So I write, the competency evaluation does not refer to Paige's mental state at the time the alleged crime was committed, in which case she may have been under the use of substances, but to her state at the time of proceedings, during which she was not actively using any legal substances while she was held in jail. Dismissals of incompetency evaluate the present cognition of Paige, but also the long history of mental illness and struggle with cognitive functioning. The scope and effect of Paige's mental illness on her ability to understand is far beyond her substance use, but it's secondary to schizophrenia, PTSD, and bipolar disorder. So if you have any questions, you can email me, laurac@headinghome.org. I can nerd out about an MSR for many hours of the day. So thanks to my fellow panelists. And I think I'm supposed to introduce, so next up is my amazing PD, Ashley Aragon. I worked with her for 2 years and she's just a phenomenal MSR. And she is going to be in conversation with Elisa, whom she helped with her Social Security application. And all right, take it away.
All right, thanks, Bug. So I'm here with my client, Elisa, and she, just so everyone is aware, she did win her SSI case. So Elisa, if you can, just explain, how did you get introduced to the SOAR program?
I was in the hospital last year in August, and I got a call from Ashley asking if I needed help with my Social Security disability, and I told her yes, and she asked if we could meet. She came and met me at the hospital before I left, and after that we've been in touch with each other ever since.
And how has the process been, just working alongside someone that, you know, guided you through the process? How was it for you?
She actually did most of the work. She did all the work. She helped me get my place, and well, it's in the process right now. She's helped me get through the Social Security. It's been so helpful to me all this time.
And you did state that, you know, you have your voucher. So tell me a little bit about what's going on with your housing status.
It's my housing status. I was looking for about 2 months for a place. I finally got in a place up the road. And I'm just waiting right now. It's getting renovated. So I should hopefully be moving in by next week.
And Elisa actually got her housing voucher through the Housing Authority. And we applied about a year ago. And she got her voucher about 2 months ago. So now she's, you know, just waiting to get her apartment all fixed up.
Yes.
I think that's it for us.
Thank you, Ashley and Elisa, and congratulations on earning your Social Security benefits. I'm sure you don't underestimate your role in the process exactly. As well. By being able to provide the information, to Ashley to be able to explain your issues. So we have plenty of time for questions. We have many that have come in. So just as a reminder for folks, you can enter your questions into Q&A, and we'll take as many as we have time to answer. So as some of the questions come in, we've been answering a few as we go, and hopefully some of your questions were answered as the panelists were speaking. And I also want to thank Bug for your presentation and highlighting that the observations of case managers and doing some initial research is really has helped your MSRs and really made them a lot richer and provided information to DDS that has been really effective. So many questions came in about that. Can you share observations and case manager observations and a little bit about how you found your research? So I'll let the panelists now camera back up. Ashley, you don't need to do that, but other panelists, if you wish to put your cameras on, and we'll take some of those questions. And since Bug just went, I thought Bug could share a little bit about the research and how DDS has been receptive to some of the research from other federal agencies. I noticed you cited NIH and maybe even SAMHSA. So talk a little bit about that. What made you dig a little bit deeper and include some research?
Yeah, so I am not a trained social services person. I come from research. And so to find outside resources is very natural to me. It's, I feel that I can't write anything. So everything I write in an MSR is source-based. The source is either primary, being the person who I'm interviewing. It can be secondary or via the doctors and medical records, or it can be tertiary via whatever that might be. So no matter what, I'm using many forms of research in my writing. And so to find out I actually do wonder, and I sometimes feel like I should ask Natasha, do they like these things that I write? So I've written everything. I've done research on methamphetamine long-term use I had a client who was a Black man with PTSD and an alcohol use disorder, and I noticed that a specific psychiatrist in the community would often malign Black men with PTSD and alcohol use disorders. So I actually, in order to tear apart her medical record, because I couldn't hide it, I did research on how Black men with PTSD and alcohol use disorders are under cared for by by psychiatry. And so I think, Natasha, I would like to ask you, does my outside research do anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all in all, anything you guys have in there is super helpful. And it's also, sometimes it's information we didn't know. And so that's helpful. It gives us context into that. And we always say, we're sort of in our medical assessments, we're writing, sort of like you guys do, we're writing the story of the person. So we're defending our position. I sort of joke that the adjudicators are paid to be part-time doctors and part-time attorneys, because they're pulling all this medical and functional information, and then they're defending this decision. So yeah, I mean, any insight you guys can give us to anything helps our case too. So yeah, absolutely. That kind of stuff is, it's gold for us, so.
Thanks. So a couple of questions came in along these lines, and I know we talked about individuals with co-occurring substance use disorders and a mental illness, as opposed to a co-occurring substance use disorder and a physical impairment like HIV related to intravenous drug use, or, let's say cirrhosis of the liver, right? We see that. So the question is it possible or most difficult when someone's main disability is their mental health diagnosis? So, and I know these are the individuals that we work with on using the SOAR model, right? We don't turn these folks away. We want to represent individuals, with these co-occurring disorders. Can you talk a little bit about that when the co-occurring is the mental health disorder? Is it more difficult than, let's say, working with somebody who, let's say has cirrhosis of the liver? It was caused by their DA&A. Maybe Natasha and maybe some of the other panelists.
So for us, I wouldn't say it's harder. It's just that we're maybe looking for something a little different when you're talking about mental health, right? Social Security relies a lot on functioning, and there's some things in physical impairments that are a little more black and white, right? Imaging, pretty black and white. vision test, hearing, that's very black and white. And while yes, functioning is still important with those situations, I would say it's even more important with mental health, right? Because that's going to affect them differently. It's not a straightforward thing. As you know, you can have 5 people with anxiety and they're all going to have different thresholds and levels of functioning. So that is where we would really rely on you guys more to kind of give us that information, because there's not a test that we can look at for anxiety, right? I mean, there's depression scales and things like that, but we really rely on how is this actually affecting them. I know, one of the things that came up earlier in an example was that somebody's so depressed that they're using to have some relief from that depression, that's affecting their functioning, right? So that kind of information for us is really important. So I wouldn't say that it's harder, it's just that we're maybe looking at things a little you're just looking at things a little differently. So I would say, well, yes, functioning is important in all cases. It's a little more important when you're talking about mental health, because that's just not something you can just see. So we definitely rely on you guys for that information.
Right. Providing that subjective information.
Yes,
Maybe a little bit
absolutely.
harder. Okay. So this question comes up generally with MSR, writing MSRs. How long should it be? So this specifically the substance use history section, right? Bugs seemed a little long, Bugs example. And we don't want to sacrifice, quality, but we want it. What is your thoughts on how long these sections could be, keeping in mind how busy DDS examiners are? So a couple came in about length of this section.
I have to laugh I'm laughing at myself because my first MSR was 20 pages. It was a perfect MSR, but my God, it was ridiculous. So, you know what? I will spend a lot of time in that I will spend the amount of time it takes to prove that my client's functioning is not due to their substance use disorder. I will take however much time, because that is one of the most important. Every section of the MSR is important, but your most important sections are your occupational history and your substance use disorder, if you have a substance use disorder. Why? Because you can't get anywhere without those two. And so I will spend as much time, the length that it takes to prove that this client is, their substance use disorder is not material to the illness, is how long I will take to do it.
Great.
Oh, and I'll always remember that my 20-page MSR I turned in because it was practice for Michael. And I was told that my substance use disorder section was not long enough. So
Fascinating. So you didn't convey at that time, about the meaning behind the usage. You may have said, Michael used from this age and left it at that. So great. So you've learned. So something we didn't really talk about was when you work with applicants that don't understand really, why are you asking about past substance use and even current substance use? What business is it of yours that I use prescription drugs the way I shouldn't, or use illicit drugs, and it's not a problem for me. I've never been diagnosed, or maybe they were diagnosed with a substance use disorder, but they don't see the reasoning behind needing to explain this and understand it from your perspective as a case manager. Do you want to share, I don't know, Amanda, any experiences about working with applicants that really didn't quite understand why this was something that should be part of any disability claim?
Sure. So when we're looking at the definition of materiality, again, DDS is trying to determine that if this person did not experience substance use, would they still be eligible for disability based on the other symptoms they're experiencing from physical or mental health impairments? So if substance use is addressed somewhere in the records, it really needs to be addressed in the medical summary report, so that you have the opportunity as the applicant's advocate to provide information that illustrates that their substance use is not material to their disability. So I saw another question that kind of ties into this, and it's more about what about someone's functioning as a result of their substance use, that because of past substance use, they have irreversible symptoms that aren't going to go away, or at least aren't going to improve enough to the level of being able to earn substantial gainful income. And my answer is that, or I'll give an anecdote. So I worked with an applicant once who had been denied 4 times, and his denial letters kept saying that they were finding substance use to be material to his disability. So when I represented him, my strategy was to focus really heavily on the substance use history section to show that, listen, his substance use is not what's causing his disability. The fact that he's using isn't the reason he has a disability. So we scheduled a neuropsychological evaluation, and through that process, they determined that he had irreversible brain damage from his many years of cocaine and alcohol use. And that wasn't going to change whether he stopped using or not. And once I had that evidence to present and provide an overview of it in the medical records, along with the actual medical documentation, he was finally approved for benefits after 10 years and 5 applications. So that's why we need to address it in our medical summary report, because like Bug said, it's one of the most important sections, especially for people who have co-occurring substance use disorders. Like, the first step is to show that the substance use disorder isn't the reason that they're applying for disability benefits. The symptoms they're experiencing outside of the substance use disorder is the reason they're applying for disability benefits.
Any other, panelists want to talk about, I think it was mentioned, our MSR interview guide does have a section on suggested questions to ask for individuals with substance use disorders. And I think Bug said, maybe, don't spend as much time reading every question, but listen to your client about, their situation, listen first and observe and get as much information as you can. But and about not re-traumatizing applicants, right? So any thoughts about how to make applicants feel comfortable sharing information about their usage, especially if maybe, they don't see it as a problem, or you learn later in the process that, yes, there is an actual substance use disorder diagnosis here, and we need to talk about it. So maybe any tips on interviewing, in addition to maybe what Bug said.
So how I presented it to the applicants I worked with was that Social Security is going to see that, and I always just said Social Security generally, I'm sorry, I know it's DDS, but for the purpose of working with an applicant that isn't familiar with the system, I would just say Social Security is looking for information. They're going to see your substance use diagnosis in your medical records. So now we have the opportunity to tell them the full story and tell them your side of things. And it's not just that you have this diagnosis that's listed in your medical records, but we can tell them, share your story and give them your side of the situation and how your substance use affects your life. And basically, my job is to advocate for and empower the applicants I work with so that they have control over their applications, and that I'm presenting them in the best light that is going to give them the best chances of getting approved for benefits.
Great. Well, thanks for that further explanation, Amanda. A bunch of questions kind of came in about that. So some questions about testing, like showing periods of sobriety. And you talked about UA's Bug, but her question was, would a home drug test administered by a local township be worth documenting, or does it have to be a test administered by a health professional. So I'm not sure if that person is like mandated to get drug testing, or does it matter? Have you used different types of drug testing to show, again, periods of non-use?
I think Natasha is the only person who can answer this.
Yeah, I think that would be a good DDS question about the testing and where the testing comes from. Doesn't matter.
Sorry, having trouble unmuting. I'm sorry, can you repeat that about the testing? What about specific about testing?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of the type of testing to show, you know, the absence of illicit drugs, periods of sobriety, would a home drug test administered by a local township be worth documenting, or does it have to be a test administered by a health professional?
I think, I mean, that would be helpful to me. That falls into functional information or I guess not functional, but maybe subjective evidence, but still that is helpful, especially because, like I said, so common that I get the question, like, I don't have anything documented in their medical records about periods of sobriety. That would be something for us. It doesn't have to be in the medical records. It could even be a family member maybe that's documenting it. You know, they're checking them regularly. That's certainly helpful. We would definitely weigh that for sure. It would be super helpful.
Okay. Here's a question about, you know, when someone is diagnosed with bipolar disorder, uses methamphetamine in an attempt to self-medicate and experiences methamphetamine-induced psychosis, how can this be addressed within the MSR? So when there is a symptom that is caused by the usage, are you looking for other periods where there may be psychosis when it wasn't induced by, you know, the substance?
I would say from our point of view, that would be helpful to know that information also. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of hard because I feel like we're not just always out looking like, where can we find, how can we deny this quickest by looking for our, you know, drugs in here. Just any information that you're giving us. Again, we're sort of looking for the story of this person. We want to see the bigger picture, especially with mental health. Because again, it's not something where you can I can't just look at an X-ray or an MRI, I can't just read an audiogram, really sort of rely on that type of information. And we're definitely aware, I mean, that people use substances for a reason. You know, we know, so that kind of information is helpful for us to know, definitely.
Okay. And I think this is along the lines of like self-medicating. So how is the medical or the materiality determination affected when the applicant is prescribed medications to assist with their symptoms, yet the client still self-medicates with other substances? Like, well, let's say the Lexapro doesn't work for my depression or my psychosis, but alcohol does, you know? So maybe an example of using that to document. Does that look like, yeah, go ahead, Natasha.
For us, yeah, I mean, simply saying that in your medical summary helps us too. We actually make comments like that quite a bit within our own assessments. When we're writing them, we'll, you know, say this, we can tell, you know, we'll talk about they've had this long history of, let's say, depression or anxiety. They start to decompensate under any kind of stress, and so they are self-medicating. Those are comments that we'll frequently put into our own assessments, again, because we see that history and we're defending that decision that yes, we see the self-medicating going on. However, you know, there's this other history of X, Y, and Z. This is increasing when they're decompensating under any kind of, you know, whether it's work stress or family things going on. So we do comment on that too in our own assessments frequently.
Great. Here's a question. We have a couple similar. If someone doesn't have a diagnosed substance use disorder, but still uses illicit substances or maybe prescription medicine not as prescribed, we should still include that in the MSR. So this would be for an individual with, and I think one of the panelists talked about that, maybe recreational drug use or periodic, drug use, where there's no actual diagnosis from an acceptable medical source. So again, doesn't have a diagnosed substance use disorder, it still uses. Should you include that in the MSR? And that could be for Bug or Amanda, because it is related to their substance use history.
I would say it would depend on how much does it come up in the medical record, because once it starts coming up in the medical record, that's when you know that's becoming a use disorder. If someone uses sporadically recreationally and it is not in any medical record, I probably just won't talk about it.
Right, because when Natasha goes through the decision tree, the materiality, is it a diagnosed condition by an acceptable medical source? Right, that's the first step.
And if we see it in the records or something, I mean, we might comment on it, that it's noted, but, again, whether the adjudicator makes that comment or one of our doctors, we might infer that too. Like, yes, we see this, but there's a history of X, Y, and Z going on. So something we say is cast a wide net. So it's helpful if you include that information, but likely we're going to comment on it anyway. And I feel like it's probably worth stating that, I myself have adjudicated literally thousands of cases. I still adjudicate claims. And I think, we don't deny people for DA&A very often. I myself have done, I can only think of 2 in about almost 11 years. I review cases for 3 teams of adjudicators. I just don't see it very often. We really try to be sensitive to the bigger picture, what's actually going on. It's something that we'll comment on. Our cases are picked up for quality review. So we want to know if the federal quality review picks it up. We want to have noted, like, hey, we saw this, but it's in the grand scheme of things, it's just a small piece of what's actually going on here. So it's helpful if you bring it up, but I did feel like I should probably point out it's not super common to deny something over DA&A.
Well, when you, again, just to remind people to revisit the substance use section of the SOAR online course, because we do discuss, we tell you, we don't want you to hide it, we want you to explain it. So we encourage you to put information about usage into a substance use history section, and then DDS, Natasha, they'll determine if it's material or not. And likely it wouldn't be, because it is not an actual substance use disorder that was diagnosed. It never rose to that level. But we always, recommend just sharing that information, because it is in the medical records, so it shows that you as a caseworker are not hiding anything. It's there, we submitted it to Social Security, it's part of the case, but it shouldn't be something that impacts, the decision. But you did share some information about usage. And again, Natasha's DDS folks will make comments on it. It, shouldn't impact the case. Question came up again. There have been a few related to marijuana. This individual did have a claim that was denied for marijuana despite having a medical marijuana card for years. So, I think this question, we need more information, I think, but generally, Natasha, if you did want to talk a little bit about, marijuana, if there is a prescription for it, how does DDS look at that?
So I was thinking about this when I was asked to comment on this specifically, especially because in New Mexico, it is legal. So we don't, I mean, I gave the policy on what goes into that, but it's just not something, at least for New Mexico, that we see it in the records that they have one, but it's not typically, or I can't say that I've ever seen it be an issue. So really for us, it's just another medication potentially. And even if they don't have a medical marijuana card, it's just something that we come across. I personally have never seen that. I mean, I would have to review a case to kind of see everything that was going on. I mean, that shouldn't be happening, I would imagine, and I would definitely appeal something like that. Because the policy is that, you know, if it's a medication as far as we're concerned. So I would have to have more information on that, but typically, speaking for New Mexico specifically, it's just not something that is viewed super negatively. We rarely even discuss it in our narratives. We might say they have a medical marijuana card. The only thing that I've seen sometimes, but it's never just been a straight up denial, is I cannot recall the name of the condition. There is a condition that can cause like nausea and vomiting. Some people react to marijuana that way, but then you'll have people who are trying to use it to take that away, but it's actually like causing, it's called cyclical something. So I could see potentially if they were told to stop using because it was causing the GI issues and they were still using, but that would fall into failure to follow prescribed treatment per se versus the marijuana itself, if that makes sense. And that I've only seen a couple times too. Most people, when they point out, that's probably what's causing it. And I apologize, I cannot remember the name of the disorder to save my life, but it's like cyclical something, and it is caused from the marijuana. It's pretty rare from what I understand.
Okay. Yeah, in the time that we have remaining, Ashley has to leave. She has to go back to the office. So thanking everyone, myself, and thank you for participating, Ashley and Elisa. So in the time that we have remaining, I'll just throw it back to all the panelists. Is there any question that you saw that I didn't get to, or any takeaway that you'd like participants to know about in terms of, you know, working with applicants, you know, with substance use disorder and being able to document this, you know, in the medical summary report, as opposed to, let's say, I know the medical source opinions was talked about, because we do try to put this information, you know, in the MSR. So just in the time remaining, if you just want to share some of your thoughts or comments on what participants should know about documenting.
I mean, for me, I'm the first person in our office that sees them. I review them before they go out to the staff. And if you know, I see that information, but if I also see that you've included, you know, they're using because of depression, they've been hospitalized, you know, multiple times for depression, that's helpful information for us to have. For one thing, I review them for presumptive disability right off the bat. So if you can provide me that information, I'm going to apply that before it even hits the adjudicator's caseload, to just maybe try and get some benefits going, try and get them some financial support and maybe some medical treatment while we're trying to adjudicate the claim. So that information is very helpful if you guys can, when you include those, very valuable. So I do appreciate that.
There were a lot of questions regarding, how do you get a neuropsych, and those kind of things. And I think one of the most important resources one can have as someone who works SOAR cases, and I know, so I have my own SOAR department. This is a little bit easier within that than I think it is in a lot of the country where you are a SOAR worker among many caseworkers, or you're a caseworker doing SOAR. But finding relationships with various providers in the city can be really, really helpful. So there's a year-long wait list for every neuropsych in the city except for one, and I happen to know the one. And so I'm able to get my clients into a neuropsych. I would say make a relationship, you know, if your city has a if your clients are all going to the same set of doctors or same, like in Albuquerque, there's a couple healthcare for the homeless or like healthcare for the homeless places. And so we are making relationships with those doctors to get our MSRs signed, or if they won't sign them, to get documented letters from them. So I would say it's worth the time and effort, and I haven't even done it as much as I want to, but making relationships is really, really important, especially for substance use. I just sent a psych to go see one of my clients who I have assessed as pending eligibility for a SOAR application, because right now all I have is evidence of meth-induced psychosis. And so I have sent a team of fourth-year psychiatric students actually in the city to go do an evaluation of him so I can get a better understanding of what's going on.
Very creative and innovative. So here you can see we have additional resources. You can go see the Social Security's policy on DA&A, and remember to go back to that online course. Some folks are looking for sample descriptions, and we do have MSRs, real MSRs that you can look at. So please, definitely go back to the online course. And again, thanks everyone for giving your time today for this very important topic. Please, complete the evaluation. And we didn't get to all the questions, but they will be packaged up and we'll get them to the panelists. We'll answer some here. So you will have your question answered within the week. So again, thanks again, everyone. And we look forward for you joining us on our, our next webinar will be in October, more details to follow. So again, thank you to all of the panelists, Natasha, Bug, Amanda, Ashley, and Eliza for, really giving your time. This is so important. And again, thanks so much and enjoy the rest of your day.